nigan nanaskamon ota be hitam goya mom scott the mom dansman is spaminsa. My name is Chief Randy Ermineskin. I make it a note to speak in Cree only because we were never allowed when I went to residential school. So our elders and my parents used to tell me, before you even address anybody, always speak your language, because we were always denied that. So I always make a note and an effort to do that all the time, because many of our young people don't speak Cree. And why we're here is to talk a little bit about truth and reconciliation, and I think the importance of our partners hitting those targets. Are they implementing reconciliation anywhere in their workplace? Is there any improvement since? I've thought about that, and so I want to give you a little bit of, I guess, some background on why it's important. I've been talking because I'm an educator, and is one ways we've taken control of our education. Because education fosters the Cree way of thinking. It's integral to pursuing self-determination. Self-determination, we always talk about it. So our Cree people can enter into health and happiness, exercising control over formal systems of education. But that's one part, because the residential schools really took away a lot from our beliefs, our ways of knowing, but also they did a lot of damage to our people, where you see a lot of homeless people and people with addictions. It affects me as well, because I have to serve the people, and a lot of them come in with a lot of issues, problems that they cannot deal with. That's why when we talk about reconciliation, it's a deep question. Are we meeting those targets? And that's where the heart of this whole thing lies, is that the cultural genocide exemplified by the residential school system. Over a century, the government's goal was to eliminate, and their policy to eliminate Aboriginal governments, ignore Aboriginal rights, terminate the treaties, and through a process of assimilation, cause Aboriginal peoples to cease to exist. I think the educational part is so important for any employee entering First Nations lands, territories, because we have to acknowledge where we're at, because there's a history. The one thing is that the attack on Indigenous and self-determination is one of the reasons Indigenous peoples have engaged so deeply with international human rights. And I've been there. I've been to the UN, and it's so important, because our governments weren't listening to us, so we had to go to the United Nations in Geneva. One fact I think I need to mention too is that United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People is funded 98% probably funded by Musqueam. I don't know if people know that, but people all over the world, Indigenous people all over the world, benefit from that document and what's been written in those articles. First Nations people have a constitutional and treaty rights that must be recognized and respected, and that's something that people don't realize, or even maybe aren't aware of, that the land that we are situated on is our land. And we've had a peace and friendship treaty with the Crown and the right of Canada that we would share this land. And that's why everyone all over Canada is able to live, but we should live closer together and get along together. So there's some background information that people need to know about the treaties. Reconciliation is a process of healing relationships that requires, this is where we get kind of touchy for a lot of people. It gets kind of touchy for people. It requires public truth telling, sharing, apology, commemoration, and redress of past harms. So there's, like I said, there's some things that happen, and people say that, the residential schools never existed. The 60s scoops, there's so many things that the constant attack. When we talk about the Peace and Friendship Treaty, they don't realize that they kept attacking our people time and time again, just for us to cease to exist, and that's wrong. And they've never addressed that. Reconciliation requires action to address destructive impacts on Aboriginal education, language and culture, health, child welfare, administration of justice, economic opportunity and prosperity. We haven't been players in this field that we talk about. Industry comes and says, well, we'll have jobs for you, but they're just mean, they're not really, they don't add up too much for our people. They give them a shovel, maybe a broom, but that's as far as it goes for many people. So they come home disappointed and say, I thought this was an opportunity for us. So that's only one aspect. But education, I remember my parents said that they only went to grade 3, my mom went to grade 6, and they were told to leave. That's just, you know, they weren't allowed to pursue post-secondary or even higher education. So when I speak about this in my own family, I'm the only one in my family that has degrees. The rest of my family, that's how hurtful the education system was. They were just told that you'll never get anywhere, you'll never be anybody, you'll never do this, and they believed it. Now, just recently, they've been finally talking about it and said, you know what, there were some harms. So it's a difficult process, and just when we start getting into a place where we're making progress, sometimes the government moves the finish line. Right? Well, we got to go a little bit further. You're getting close, but you know, it's never a finished process or really clear on what they wanted from us. So that's why I said reconciliation has a long ways to go. You know, you see, we have a lot of homelessness, houselessness, poverty, and we have to figure out a way to how we can partner with society, industry, and how we can close those gaps, because we alone can't do it by ourselves in our communities, because we're 450 homes behind trying to do that. So a lot of times, as soon as somebody gets up in the morning, they realize, I don't have a job, I don't have a home, I don't have a family. You know, it just, things build up, and guess what happens? I think that's something that we all have to come to realize, is how treaty can provide us answers and solutions if we respect that, I guess, that relationship on the lands that we are living on. There's so much to offer. It's just a matter of how do we come together and bring that together to help our people, and really stand side to side and say, and let's work this out, and let's create a better partnership so that people can have success in their lives. Perspectives of Aboriginal elders and knowledge keepers, our concepts and practices of reconciliations are vital to long-term reconciliation. Our elders can share a lot, and when the moment they begin to share, they remember things in the past, how it used to be, and they'll always be sad about it and say, you know what, we never had these problems before. Now they're just building and building and building, but they always talk about, remember when we used to visit each other? We don't have that anymore. Remember when we used to work together and build a house together? And to have 3 families in one household, it was always accepted back then. And that's how they communicated and kept the families together. Then that's something that they always tell us, is that the reason why they did that is because of residential schools. They were afraid to lose their children again. That's why you have crowded homes many times, is that I don't want to go through that again. As soon as maybe an RCMP is checking on a house, or if something is there on a call, they'll come to a house, and it automatically something triggers, right? And that's how it was when, back in the day, when they started picking up children and taking them away. The RCMP plus the superintendent used to come and just grab the kids out of the parents' hands and say, they're going to be taken to school without anybody's say, and people would be crying. But the one thing that they always say, if you deny this, you'll be taken to jail and be charged. So there's a lot of these things that they'll talk about, those stories, but the history about it is that there's so much in the teaching. When they translate it, when they speak in Cree, there's so much more meaning to it, and that's something that we're trying to continue to teach our young people, how important these stories are on our oral traditions. We're our storytellers. Now we're trying to maintain and bring our culture, our languages back, and revitalize it. I teach a course at the university. It's called Resurgence. It's an English course, and trying to stir up the inner warrior of our students. So I've been pretty successful at the University of Alberta, and here at the college, and the University of Calgary and the University of Regina. So I'm happy that they accepted that, And every time we talk about, at first it's a painful process for the students to realize and hear about residential school and say, oh, I hated that when I heard that. But towards the end of the course, they're just they're re-energized, saying, you know what, I can do this. The revitalization and integration of Indigenous knowledge systems, oral histories, laws, protocols, and connection to the land are essential. So we're starting to do that more and more. You'll see more universities kind of loosely use land-based learning, but it's us that have those answers. It's us that can provide those kinds of things, and where they're overlooking that, they'll hear one story and say, well, let's develop a course for this. It's much more than that. It's much more than that. And that's what they really have to, they need to sit with elders, they need to sit with our own educators that have that knowledge, so they understand, so they're not missing anything. I think that's critical going forward. Trust is a real critical thing. You know, I laughed one day when one of our elders, he was told, well, here, come and sign a paper. He said, sign something, and they laughed. Last time we signed something, something happened. And you know, it's kind of a joke, but it's something that's real and necessary. We have to build trust. People come here and say, we have an answer for you, but there's not a cookie cutter. It's not a cookie cutter process where everything is the same for all. No, it's not. We have our own distinct languages. We have our own distinct beliefs. When we talk about the United Nations Declaration, we mentioned that about climate change. One of our elders was the one back in the 70s that talked about that, and the government officials at the time at the UN asked them, so I suppose the Native people know about the environment. And you know what the elders said in response? He said, well, who's going to speak on the four-leggeds? Who's going to speak on behalf of the animals, the fish? If we don't protect them, who else is going to protect them? So that's the contribution that many of our First Nations have made to society, is that's how climate change began. They started talking about it. Now look at where we are. People are in fear because all this wild weather everywhere and floods and whatever is happening. But we have to take a look. We are so connected to the land. I always think about that. My mom, before she passed away in the 90s, she said, there's one thing I want to make sure that you always know, is that stay close to people that have their hearts close to the ground. I didn't understand that till maybe about 5 years ago. You know what she meant? Keep yourself humble. Stay close to people that are humble. So those kinds of little stories that I think about all the time. And as a leader, I always thought about that. You know, I used to think I had compassion. Not until I became a chief, I had to really think back, and I was moved by it because I didn't have that compassion. I had to learn over time. So that's how we lived, and that's what we're trying to go with all this cultural revitalization and the way our belief systems were. Reconciliation requires sustained public education dialogue and youth engagement about our history and legacy of residential schools, treaty and Aboriginal rights, and past and present contributions of Indigenous peoples to Canadian society. I think if we create a partnership, let's involve the First Nations as well, the elders, even the youth, because we always say that our youth are our future, and we kind of oftentimes push them aside and say you're not important right now. And I think that affects them, and that's why they get into certain activities that aren't good for them, and we have to protect their health as well. But we do need to work on this reconciliation part and learn about and educate ourselves. You know, it's you can say land acknowledgement and that's it. That's not reconciliation. Something is given back. I think that's important. That's my main push, is always that we need to protect treaty, because it has a story to tell, and that's so important for us.